All right, welcome back. Well, we've got an exciting program today, and as you know, we have Heritage more than 500,000 members across the country and growing. And if you enjoy today's President's Club, I hope you take back to your state the message of Heritage and bring somebody back new the next time. We were talking earlier at breakfast, a few of us, after being very inspired by the interns and the young people there. And at next year's President's Club, one of the parts of the program that we're considering doing is inviting you to bring children or grandchildren and having a parallel program there that they can work too, because that is the future, obviously, and we're all about that. So we'd like input on that in years to come. And that's ideas that are coming directly from you and that we're hoping to implement. So among our many members, one today stands out. And he is the person who will be the recipient of a very special award. 2 years ago, we commissioned an award called the Coors Noble Scaife Founders Award in honor of three men, Joseph Coors, Ed Noble, and Dick Scaife, who were some of the earliest supporters, very first supporters of the Heritage Foundation. In a way, took a gamble on an idea. They were entrepreneurs, policy entrepreneurs, and on people. And in that, they led to what we are now and the influence that Heritage is now. There are many members who have been loyal supporters for so many years. The Coors Noble Scaife Award is presented each time at President's Club to someone who's been a member for 15 years or more. And you know all the stories. You may not know this one. His name is Harold Siegel. Harold's story started as a young Jewish kid from Queens who got involved in his local printer, printing raffle tickets to raise money for his baseball team so they could get new uniforms. And he struck up a friendship with this printer, and he learned the trade. And then he served in the military during the Korean War. He married a beautiful girl, Marilyn, and they raised a family. And Marilyn's with us today. He launched a successful business career and a wonderful business called Excelsior Graphics, which is right in downtown Manhattan. And he passed the blessings of success on to his family, his community, many civic organizations, and the Heritage Foundation. For many, many years, Harold chaired our New York Committee for Heritage. And imagine, well, maybe we can imagine these days, but imagine what it was like to start a conservative committee for Heritage in the late 2000s. I will say that we're honoring a young man from Queens this afternoon, and we'll be welcoming a man from Queens tonight, both of who understood what it takes, what America stands for, and what it takes to make success, and how great this country is. So I'd ask Ed Foner, president and founder, to join me as we honor the great Harold Siegel with the Coors Noble Scaife Award. Harold.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to have lunch with you. Also, I think the Joseph Coors, Ed Noble, and Richard Mellon Scaife Award, there should be two other people's names added to it. Obviously, one is Ed Foner. And the other gentleman who I didn't get to know as well as I know Ed is Phil Trulock, and I believe Phil is here today. As founders, they did a lot to make us all happy, and it's the reason we're all here together. They had great ideas. They were able to finance the ideas that other founders had. I'm deeply indebted to them, as we all are, because that's why we have a wonderful conservative movement, and the bellwether of the movement is right here at Heritage. My wife Marilyn and I are Heritage fans. I always thought I was the #1 fan, but she just corrected me and said, "You were 1, I was 1A." So she gave in to me that way. Other founders that we're deeply indebted to were the founders of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We should always remember that. My family and I, and as all of us in this room, realize Heritage stands for free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and above all, a strong national defense. Speaking for my wife, Marilyn, she and I both pledged to continue our service to Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action, and we accept this award with great humility. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. Let's come forward here.
Thank you very much.
Harold's affiliated with many organizations. Heritage is the best one affiliated with, but the second one is his social club in New York, and that is, of course, the Friars Club. So he asked me not to have the reels of Milton Berle and Bob Hope and his back and forth with them, but we're lucky that this is not a roast, Harold. So thank you so much. Now, to introduce our keynote speaker today, I'd like to invite an incredible member of our Heritage family up here, and that is Billie Jean Murphy. Billie Jean is a fifth-generation Texan, an entrepreneur, a mom, a lover of horses, a product of the oil and gas industry, a strong believer in free markets. She's also an innovator. She and her husband, her late husband, Terry, did something that no one else had ever done before here at Heritage. They included both Heritage and Heritage Action in their estate plans. Terry made the very first commitment and gift to Heritage Action. Sadly, Terry, an amazing Texan, an amazing friend of freedom, made the first estate commitment to Heritage Action, and he passed away in August of 2015. But as Billie Jean would say, he was a thoughtful way that he approached life, and he had a deep passion and vision to help save this country. In April of 2016, Billie Jean was awarded the George Washington Generations Yet Unborn Award from Heritage. And it awarded to a Heritage member who demonstrates a zealous concern for the future citizens of this nation. We're honored to have her with us from the Lone Star State to introduce someone from Oklahoma, our keynote speaker. Please welcome Billie Jean Murphy. Billie Jean.
Thank you. Howdy, y'all. Thank you, John, Heritage members, Heritage Action members and staff, and esteemed guests. I'm honored to bring to you our 14th Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. That's a lot of title. Mr. Pruitt's many accomplishments include serving as a member of the Oklahoma Senate from 1998 to 2006. Scott ran his own private law firm. He also owned and managed a minor league baseball team known as the Oklahoma Red Hawks. This is just such a gutsy cowboy from Oklahoma. You gotta love him. While serving as Oklahoma's Attorney General From 2011 to 2017, he sued the EPA. I would have loved him in on the wall when he was appointed administrator. Scott continues to try to diminish, and is diminishing, their illegal overreach into states' rights and our private rights. There is something weird about us from Texas, and I've been trying to figure it out. And I think it might have to do with the land. And I've been blessed with a small piece of that land. I'm currently looking at different options. What is the best use for this land? What is my best use as a steward? And I've been approached and researching a solar farm. In this process, I have learned if there is one Houston toad on my 100 acres, I can't do a thing. I own mineral rights, surface rights, water rights, and one toad can determine what I do. So I'm going to bring to you the man who's emptying the swamp, and I hope getting rid of the toads. Our new Environmental Protection Agency Administrator, Mr. Scott Pruitt. Yeehaw!
Administrator Pruitt.
Well, good
welcome.
afternoon. Good afternoon.
Welcome to the Heritage Foundation's President's Club meeting.
Yeah.
It is an honor to have you here today.
Good to be with you.
I'm Rob Bluey. I'm the Vice President of Communications at the Heritage Foundation and the Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Signal. 3 years ago, Heritage created the Daily Signal to tell the stories that were either being misreported, underreported, or just plain ignored by the liberal media.
Which means you have a lot to do.
We certainly do. We certainly do. And one of the things that we're so excited about doing today is bringing you the stories that Administrator Pruitt's working on at EPA and so many of the exciting things that have been going on there. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I want to let you know that I will be taking your questions. So as you see on the screen, if you have a question, you can text Pruitt to the number there. I'll have them on my iPad here, so you can begin doing that immediately if you'd like. And also, I'd like to welcome those who are viewing this live on Facebook. We're streaming today's conversation on Facebook, where we have a robust and big audience there, just as we'll be doing tonight with President Trump's remarks. So with that, let's get started. You've had a busy week. Yesterday, you took a very decisive action and ended the sue and settle process that has been plaguing EPA and our government for a number of years. Can you explain to this audience why that is so significant and what it actually means?
Yes, and well, it's good to be with you. In fact, I see General Meese here in the front, and it's always good to see General Meese. He has been a great inspiration to me over the years as I served as Attorney General. And with respect to this particular question on sue and settle, it actually is something that General Meese talked about back in the mid-1980s. We've seen agencies at the federal level for many years engage in rulemaking through the litigation process, where a third party will sue an agency, and in the course of that lawsuit, the agency will agree to certain obligations, maybe take a discretionary duty under a statute and make it non-discretionary, or there'll be a timeline that's in the statute and they'll change the timeline. But suffice it to say, they engage in what we would call substantive rulemaking, and then they cabinet within a consent decree, and a court blesses it without much inquiry. And then the agency will take that consent decree and go to states and citizens all over the country and say, thou shall. And sometimes that mandate is totally untethered to the statute, the obligations that Congress has passed for an agency to engage in. You know, it is fifth grade civics. Now, I don't know if they teach civics in fifth grade anymore, but at least they used to. But fifth grade civics, you know, I hang out in the executive branch. We're an executive branch agency. My job is to enforce the laws as passed by whom? Congress. They give me my authority. That's the jurisdictional responsibilities that I have. And when litigation is used to regulate through litigation, to create obligations, to create legislation, if you will, through that process, that's abusive. That's wrong. And so we took the first step under the Trump administration yesterday to terminate, to end the sue and settle practice entirely at the EPA. I announced that yesterday, and it's not just an attitude shift. It's not just a commitment to not engage in sue and settle and regulation through litigation. We actually put directives in the memoranda, safeguards, if you will. For instance, if there is settlement that we're engaged in, settlement discussions with a third party that sued the agency, we will post that settlement for all the world to see for at least 30 days, for people to comment on it across the country, so that there's transparency with respect to those discussions. If a state seeks to intervene in litigation with respect to issues that impact them, we're going to have a very generous and accommodating attitude towards states participating in those settlement discussions. But here's, I think, one of the more important ones. In the past, as the sue and settle practice has been affected by third parties, they would go to the EPA and say, let's work out a deal, and then, as I indicated, go to the court, put it within a consent decree without any type of transparency. But here's the kicker. Then they would pay attorney's fees to the group that sued them. So the group is effectively engaged in rulemaking, setting the priorities of the agency, and they get attorney's fees, get paid to do it. So yesterday in my directive to the agency, I said this: we're not going to pay attorney's fees anymore in that regard. If we have a settlement and there's no prevailing party, there shouldn't be any attorney's fees. And so we've sent a directive out, no attorney's fees as part of the end of this sue and settle practice. So it's been a busy week already, but every week's that way. So it's a busy week.
Well, let's take a step back. I do want to delve into a couple of other policy issues, but I want to ask you at first, because the left over the past generation has defined environmentalism in a way that is counter to freedom, conservation, and even science. I want to ask what you consider true environmentalism.
You know, it's a great question. It's one that I think our society and our country needs to ask and answer, because the past administration told everyone in this room, told the American citizens across the country, that we had to choose between jobs and growth and environmental stewardship. And we've never done that as a country. To give you an example, since 1980, there's certain pollutants that we regulate under the Clean Air Act, criteria pollutants they're called, SOx, NOx, particulate matter, ozone, those types of pollutants. We've reduced those pollutants by over 65% since 1980. But we've also grown our GDPs very, very substantially. And so we as a country have always used innovation, technology to advance environmental stewardship, reduction in those pollutants, but also grow our economy at the same time. It was the past administration that told everyone that you had to choose between the two. That just simply is a false narrative. It's a false choice. And so we need to ask and answer, what is true environmentalism? And I think true environmentalism, from my perspective, is using the natural resources that God has blessed us with to feed the world, to power the world, but with a sensitivity to future generations, to cultivate, to harvest, to be respectful, good stewards, good managers of our natural resources, to bequeath those natural resources to the next generation. I mean, it'd be almost like having this beautiful apple orchard that can feed the world. The environmental protection folks of the past 8 years would say, put up a fence. Don't touch the apple orchard, though it can feed people. That's not the proper approach. They would say it's so pristine, we shouldn't touch it. That's not what we should do. We should what? Harvest that apple orchard, use it to benefit our fellow mankind, but with environmental stewardship in mind for future generations. We can do both, and that's what we need to do at the EPA going forward, and we are doing that.
So I'm glad you brought up President Obama and his administration, because the media often portrays him as an environmental hero. Well, you're portrayed as the villain. There's no day that goes by probably where you don't see the clips that demonstrate that kind of situation. So I want to ask you, and this is an opportunity for you to tell this audience, what are you most frustrated about the media's coverage of you personally and the EPA in general under President Trump?
Well, I don't like that hero-villain thing that you put through there, but I will say this to you, that when you look at the past administration and actually what they achieved as far as environmental outcomes, they didn't achieve very much. I mean, in fact, look at those criteria pollutants that we do regulate. 120 million people in this country live in areas that don't meet air quality standards. That's what the previous administration left us with. They had Flint, Michigan, and Gold King, Colorado, with respect to water. With respect to Superfund sites, those areas that we regulate that have land waste, we have more sites now than when President Obama came into office. They tried to regulate CO2 twice and struck out twice. The UR decision and the Clean Power Plan. So they really, when you look at that agenda, what did they actually achieve other than uncertainty and adversarial relationships with those across the country? When you look at farmers and ranchers as an example, they are our first environmentalists. They are our first conservationists. The greatest asset they have is their land. They care about the water that they drink. They care about the air that they breathe. We should see them as partners, not adversaries. We should see states in the same vein. They have expertise and resources that we don't have, and we have resources they don't have. It should be a partnership and collaboration. I've been on a 25-state tour over the last couple of 2 to 3 months with respect to the Waters of the United States rule. We're withdrawing that rule. We're getting that right. But as we've gone through that process, I was in Utah with Governor Herbert talking about issues there, second most dry state in the country. The very next day I was in Minnesota. Different issues in Minnesota with respect to water as compared to Utah. So as we're doing our work in Washington, D.C., we should do our work in collaboration and partnership and cohesion with states so that we can work on environmental issues from Superfund to air quality to water quality across the full spectrum of things that we do in partnership with those folks. That's the failure of the past administration. The past administration saw those folks as adversaries and not partners. And moreover, they acted outside the scope of their authority, which created tremendous uncertainty. The president, who's doing a fabulous job. The president is leading with great courage and conviction. He's in the White House today, I think, because of 2 primary things. The American people want courage and they want action. And he embodies both of those with respect to his leadership. But as we look at these issues that we regulate with respect to air, land, and water, these are issues that we ought to be working together to achieve and setting clear objectives. Where should we be with air quality in 2 to 4 years? Where should we be with respect to investment in water infrastructure? How do we improve and remediate those sites with respect to Superfund? Let me give you an example. There's a site just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. It's called Westlake in the Superfund portfolio we have. It's a site that has 8,000 tons of uranium from the Manhattan Project, actually, commingled with 38,000 tons of solid waste dispersed over this large geographical area just outside of St. Louis. It was discovered in 1970. In 1990, the EPA listed that site, 1990, listed that site on the national priority list. 27 years later, as we're in this auditorium together, the agency still has not made a decision on how to remediate that site, excavate or cap the site, not remediate it, not clean it up. 27 years to make a decision. That's wholly unacceptable. In fact, that's one of the things that as I came into this position that I was so struck by, that as I was engaged in meetings at the office, there just appeared to be a lack of urgency, a lack of focus, a lack of energy to do what's right, to serve the American people in a fundamental way, to provide real, tangible environmental outcomes in water, air, and Superfund. So we're getting back to the basics. And we're operating within the rule of law. We're respecting process. And we're also engaged in federalism principles to ensure that we're partnering together. It sounds like a pretty good agenda to me. And we ought to be, I think, across this country, adopting that, not vilifying it, to your question. Now, I don't remember your question, but that's what I would say.
Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can text Pruitt, and we'll put the number on the screen, 202-600-9709. Or there should be cards on your table maybe, and we can pick those up if you don't have a phone with you. I want to ask specifically about Waters of the United States. You raised that. At Heritage, it's an issue that we've done a lot of work on. It's something that we recognize has a tremendous impact across this country. You've made a decision that you are going to conduct a reevaluation. What are your goals as you go through that process and coming out of it?
Clarity. I mean, that's what's so crazy about the past administration said, we need a definition. To give you a little background. The last time that we defined that was 1986, as far as waters of the United States, and then we provided guidance in 2008. That's the background as far as the definition of what a water of the United States is. And so the past administration said, we need to provide clarity across the country on when federal jurisdiction begins and ends. If that was their objective, they failed miserably. Because people all over the country have no idea today where federal jurisdiction begins and ends under that 2015 rule. Dry creek beds, ephemeral drainage ditches. I mentioned Utah. I was in Salt Lake City, Utah with Governor Herbert with an Army Corps of Engineers representative about 2 months ago. And we were standing outside the subdivision, and this Army Corps of Engineers representative pointed to an ephemeral drainage ditch and said, "Scott, that is a water of the United States." And I said, "It's not going to be anymore." And that's really the challenge here, is that you had so much confusion and uncertainty about what waters were in, what waters were out. And so what does that mean? That means land use across this country is held hostage because folks aren't going to deploy capital, they're not going to allocate resources, they're not going to put capital at risk, and then face a fine 5 or 10 years from now saying you should have got a permit because this is covered under the waters of the United States. So the number one objective is to get the definition right and to provide clarity across the country on when federal jurisdiction begins and ends, and we're going to do that in 2018. We've got a withdrawal rule that's in place right now that will be finished by the end of the year, and then we've got a substitute definition, and this is where the environmental left misses it. They call this deregulation. This is regulatory reform, this is regulatory clarity. We're getting rid of the deficient rule, but then we're going to provide a new definition that provides bright line, objective criteria by which to define when federal jurisdiction begins and ends. That's so key, and that's what we're going to accomplish in 2018. And it's not going to be an ephemeral drainage ditch.
Okay, very good. Clean Power Plan, another major action that you've taken recently. In the same kind of context, what are the implications of doing away with that, and where do you see it going next?
First time in history that the U.S. Supreme Court entered a pending litigation and issued a stay of enforcement against the Clean Power Plan. That case was being litigated in the D.C. Circuit. The Supreme Court intervened and said, stop the enforcement of the rule because it's going to impact the marketplace in ways that we don't think perhaps meet the statutory criteria or authority of the agency. So again, uncertainty. We had uncertainty in the utility sector. And let me say this to you generally. From a regulatory perspective, this is going to be a very profound statement. Regulations ought to make things regular. I mean, that's our job, is to take a statute, administer the statute, and make things regular across the full spectrum of people that are what? Subject to the statute or subject to the regulation. It's not to pick winners and losers. It's not the job of the EPA to say to a utility company in any state in this country, you should choose renewables over what? Natural gas or coal or other choices. We need fuel diversity in the generation of electricity. We need more choices, not less. And no agency at the federal level should use their coercive power to force businesses, utility companies, to take those fuel sources away. They should be making it on what? Cost, stability, and I would say resiliency of the grid. You know, the president talks a lot about growth, economic growth. We're already at 3+%. This tax cut package is going to provide tremendous growth. When you grow your economy at 3 to 4%, as opposed to 1%, the power grid, the resiliency of the power grid, the stability of the power grid takes on more significance. And so when you reduce fuel sources, that creates more vulnerabilities. We need solid hydrocarbons like coal to be stored on site to address peak demand. We need natural gas, we need renewables, we need all that. You know, Chancellor Merkel, this Paris Accord situation, I know you didn't ask about this, but I got to get this in. You know, when we talked about this Paris Accord issue, if Germany is so concerned about the reduction of CO2, why is Chancellor Merkel getting rid of all nuclear in Germany? It's hypocritical. It's hypocritical. And oh, by the way, we're at pre-1994 levels in this country, and from 2000 to 2014, after we exited Kyoto, we reduced our CO2 footprint by over 18%, almost 20% in that same time frame. This country has always led with action, not words and labels like Paris. And the president made a tremendously courageous decision by saying we're going to get out of the Paris Accord, put America first, and make sure we lead with action and not words.
Thank you for sending in some of the questions. We'll begin with this one. What is your strategy for rolling back cumbersome regulations which hurt small businesses?
Well, look, I mean, I think there's been a threefold strategy that I've introduced to the agency since day one. In fact, as I addressed the agency on the first day, I talked about three primary things. One, respect for rule of law. You know, the only authority we have is the authority that Congress gives us in the statutes, which enhances regulatory certainty when we act pursuant to statutory guidelines. Secondly, we're going to respect process, which means that as we go through rulemaking, we're actually going to do what Congress says. We're going to propose a rule, we're going to take comment, It's our responsibility to respond to that comment, and then we finalize the rule by being informed of how it's going to impact folks all over the country. That's good. That's how consensus is built. And then thirdly, we're going to respect federalism. Congress has prescribed into the Clean Air Act, into the Clean Water Act, certain responsibilities that are placed upon states. They imagined and really believed that we could work together. So those are the three primary principles by which we're doing our work. And I think as we do that, it's going to create better outcomes in both air, land, and water as far as environmental outcomes. But as far as, when you look at the disrespectful process, that's the reason the sue and settle aspect makes, the remedy there is so important. So I think if we get back to the basics there and focus on those three cornerstone principles, that we're going to see better outcomes as far as air attainment, water infrastructure, sites being remediated on the Superfund list, and it's going to be very encouraging. In small business, we've also done something else. President Bush introduced something. It actually dates back to the Clinton administration. It was called the Common Sense. It was a Common Sense initiative, and then President Bush built on that and called it the sector strategy, where we bring in sectors of our economy, farming and ranching, chemical companies, energy, oil and gas, others. And we've updated that because it went by the wayside under the Obama administration. We've revived that, and we've created something called the Smart Sector Strategy. And so those businesses are now dialoguing with us on how we can work together going into the future to achieve better outcomes in the environment.
What's an issue that you're engaged in that isn't getting the attention that you think it deserves, that this audience should know about?
Well, I think one that's not talked about a lot is last year Congress actually adopted some amendments to the Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, and created new responsibilities for our agency. For instance, chemicals that enter the flow of commerce, we have to approve those chemicals before they enter the stream of commerce. And when I came into this position, we had a backlog of over 700 of those chemicals. We cleared those out by July of this year. We focused resources, and we provided certainty to folks across the marketplace on whether those chemicals could be used in an effective way. So we're implementing those changes to TSCA that I think provide certainty to those that are regulated. And the other area I would talk to you about is the Superfund arena. I mentioned the one site in Westlake, Missouri. I'd love to tell you that that's an isolated example, that's just one of many of the 1,336 sites that we regulate. We have many, unfortunately, sites that have languished on that list since inception of the program in the 1980s, sites that have been there for decades with respect to no decision and very little action. The American people deserve, in my view, answers and leadership on how to remediate those sites. That's some of the most tangible benefit that we can provide folks environmentally. Just recently, San Jacinto, a site in Houston that's off of I-10 in a harbor there where there's a bunch of barge traffic. There was a site listed around 2009, 2010. It has dioxin on the site. With the hurricane when it came through, there was much concern about the dioxin being released into the barge traffic and impacting folks' health. And the remedy that had been in place the last 10 years was literally putting rocks on top of the site to prevent release. Sounds crazy, but that's exactly the case. So when I was there after the storm, I said, that's not acceptable. We're going to make a decision for the betterment of the community to fix that site and provide permanence. Just last week, I signed that record of decision, giving clear direction on how we're going to provide permanent relief to prevent the release of dioxin into the water supply there in Houston, Texas. So we've got to take, I think, concrete steps to address these environmental issues, and we're doing such good work that no one really, I shouldn't say no one, folks see it in the communities. There's great optimism across the country, except in Washington, D.C., so that means things are going really well. And so it's good.
Okay, another question from our audience. Can you describe the shortcomings of the scientific evidence for climate change and the type of data that would be needed to convince you that climate change is happening?
Well, a couple things. Let me address something a little bit big picture, and then I'll get into the specific question. I have advisory boards at my agency. The CASAC is an advisory board, science advisory committee that advises me on air quality issues. I have BOSC, and I have the science advisory board. Scientists that make up these bodies, and there are dozens and dozens of these folks. Over the years, those individuals, as they've served in those capacities, guess what's also happened? They've received monies through grants. and sometimes substantial monies through grants. So I think what's most important at the agency is to have advisors, scientific advisors, that are objective, independent-minded, providing transparent recommendations to me as the administrator and to our office on decisions we're making on the efficacy of rules that we're passing to address environmental issues. And if we have individuals that are on those boards receiving money from the agency, sometimes going back years and years to the tune of literally tens of millions of dollars over time, that to me causes question on the independence and the veracity and the transparency of those recommendations that are coming our way. Next week, I want you to know something. I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but next week we're going to fix that. Next week, I'm going to issue a directive that addresses that, that's much like the sue and settle, to ensure the independence and transparency and objectivity with respect to the scientific advice that we're getting at the agency. Now, on this issue, with respect to climate change, it's not a question about whether climate change occurs. It does. It's not a matter of whether man contributes to it. We do. The question is, how much do we contribute to it? How do we measure that with precision? But it's a little bit more difficult questions like, when we have individuals telling us today in 2017 that they know what the ideal global average surface temperature should be in the year 2100, I think there should be a debate around that. I think there ought to be discussion about that very issue. There are some, perhaps even in this very room, that believe that it poses an existential threat. You know, if it poses an existential threat, I want to know. If it's more important than ISIS in North Korea, I think we better know about it. So let's have a real meaningful discussion about that. The American people deserve, in my view, an objective, transparent, honest discussion about what we know and what we don't know with respect to CO2. It's never taken place. And that's the reason I've been proposing a red team, blue team exercise, where we would bring red team scientists in and blue team scientists in, and they would engage in a multi-month process asking of each other these very difficult questions to help inform the American public on these issues to help build consensus toward this very important issue. Here's the last thing I would say about it. That's a very important exercise. And it's something that Steve Koonin actually published in the Wall Street Journal about 3 or 4 months ago. I think it was a well-written piece, and you ought to go read it. There's actually another piece called The Climate of Complete Certainty that Bret Stephens wrote in the New York Times about this very issue, where politicians have taken information that we know and stretched it so far on this issue that it strains credibility. And so we need to have a very honest, open discussion about this as a citizenry and as a country with respect to what we do. But here's the other thing. What are the tools in the toolbox? That matters. Remember what I said earlier, that the only authority I have is the authority that Congress gives me. And so we have to ask and answer the question, what does the Clean Air Act say to this issue as far as regulation of CO2? The last time the Clean Air Act was amended, anybody want to guess when that was? I know you study this every day. 1990, 27 years ago. And if you go back and read post the amendments, the Clean Air Act amendments from 1990, Congressman Dingell is not the most conservative member to ever have served in Congress. Congressman Dingell said to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 would be a glorious mess. The Clean Air Act was set up to address local and regional air pollutants, not the global phenomena of GHG and CO2. So we have to ask the question, one, what do we know? And let's inform ourselves about it. But we also have to ask, what can we do about it and what tools are in the toolbox? And I can't make that up. That's what the last administration did. And when they made it up, they got sued. And they got stays of enforcement, like the Clean Power Plan, which doesn't achieve any environmental outcomes and creates uncertainty in the marketplace. It was part of their war on coal, their war on fossil fuels. And I've got to ask you a question rhetorically. Where is it in the Clean Air Act that the EPA has authority to declare war on any sector of our economy? I don't see it. But that's what the last administration did, and it's ended under President Trump.
I have a couple of questions about what it's like to work at EPA headquarters. Specifically, are you running into any internal or political challenges with a staff that might not be willing to carry out the vision you articulated to this audience earlier?
Well, let me say a couple things. One, having led a business, having been in that space and whatnot, I didn't start from a premise that folks weren't going to be partners. In fact, the very first day that I was there, I talked about rule of law and process and federalism, as I indicated to you, but I also said to the folks there that I was going to listen, I was going to learn from them, but we were going to lead. We were going to make decisions. And so I've tried to, I think, exercise goodwill in working with folks. I think I don't want people presuming certain things about me that are not based in fact, and I shouldn't presume certain things about others. And so I've tried to lead that way at the agency. That being said, I do think that there is a lack of urgency in some of these areas with respect to Superfund and otherwise, and we're vitalizing those areas, actually. And we're actually getting the things done that matter and holding folks accountable. There's a gentleman I've brought into leadership. He worked for Governor Ducey in Arizona, and I was with Governor Ducey a couple weeks ago, and I thanked him for his contribution. But this individual came to me. He led the DEQ there in Arizona, and then he went into the cabinet under Governor Ducey. And when he came into leadership at the DEQ in Arizona, he said, Scott, we had over 700 people that we employed. And I started focusing on metrics and performance, and every day asking and answering, what progress are we making? Are we actually remediating sites? And measuring that every single day. And there were some people at the agency, he said to me, that weren't into that. They weren't into accountability. And those folks just kind of left. And at the end of that process, it went from an agency of around 700 to an agency of around 350. And he said, Scott, what's amazing to me is that when that happened, those very same, we were actually producing better results with the 350 measuring outcomes than we have the 700. Now, that person is now at the EPA. And I've given him a charge. We have a dashboard that we've created, a dashboard of measuring results every single day. His name's Henry Darwin, by the way. I call this the Darwin effect. And I say, Henry, how are we progressing today? How are we doing in air quality? And really, let me ask you something. What's Republican and Democrat about improving air quality? Where's the political issue around that? Where's the political issue around avoiding Flint, Michigan and Gold King, Colorado? Where's the Republican-Democrat approach to remediating Superfund sites and making sure that they're actually reused and communities can enjoy those areas once again? There shouldn't be any political margin on any of those issues. These are not controversial things. We ought to focus on the good work of the agency, respect rule of law, engage in partnership, and you know what's going to happen? Good things. We ought to celebrate that as a country. So the Darwin effect is in full force, and we're going to make sure that we achieve accountability. And just one other thing. Permitting. You know, permitting has been a big issue with respect to infrastructure, and it's a big issue. And permitting sometimes at our agency has not been, is there an environmental issue and how do we fix it? It's been obstructionism. It's taken a decade or 12 years or 15 years, and I'm not making this up, where it takes that long to make a decision on a permit. That's not a decision. That's just simply no, and cloaked in no decision, right? And so when I met with Henry earlier, I said, Henry, we've got to have an outside time where all permits are processed. Let's establish a timeline that all permits are going to be processed within X number of years or whatever. And this was one of our first meetings, and I just hypothetically said, 2 years or something. Let's find the right time. And he said, Scott, I was thinking more like 6 months. And I said, I love you, Henry. I love you, Henry. So by the end of 2018, every permit that we issue, up or down, you're going to know within 6 months. You're going to know within 6 months.
I have one final question for you. I know you have a meeting that you need to get to at the White House. This audience is going to have the opportunity to hear from President Trump tonight in just a few hours. We're all very excited about that.
That's good.
What has it been like working with him over these past
it's been
several
wonderful.
months?
It's
What
been
can you tell
wonderful.
us about it?
I mean, as I shared with you earlier, the president is full of courage and he's full of action. He wants results. And that's what the American people want. They don't like all the blather. They don't like all the labels. They don't like all the bumper stickers. Let's actually achieve things. And that's what he's done his whole life. And so to be serving him, I seek every day, and I mean this sincerely, to bless him. I want to bless him in the decisions he's making. And I want to carry out my responsibilities at our agency in a way that is respectful of the things I've talked to you about today. And there's so much optimism across the country with respect to all the various states and stakeholders that there's a different trajectory. You know, several years ago, there was a book that I picked up. It's probably 15 years or so old, called The Culture Code. And it's a book written by a French sociologist. And I don't normally pick up those books, but you know, this was an interesting book, you know, where his business, his career is he engages in surveys and focus groups where Coca-Cola or IBM will hire him and say, okay, you go out and find the code, the one word that describes my company. And so he did that, and that's his whole career. He wrote this book, and he talks about various areas, but he spent one entire chapter on America. And he surveyed all these people across the country, focus groups, asking questions. And he boiled the code word for America down to one word. One word. Anybody want to guess what it is? Dream. Dream. And I'll tell you, as a country, we've lost that a little bit. We're a little bit more risk averse than we used to be. We don't dream and aspire as much as we used to be. This president is reinvigorating that. This administration is reinvigorating that. We have nothing to be apologetic about as a country. We're the best in the world. We feed the world, we power the world. And oh, by the way, when it comes to environmental stewardship, we're better than anybody else. And that's the gospel truth. Let's not be apologetic about it. Let's lead with action. That's what the president is doing. And I love serving with him. I love serving him. And there's much optimism, much hope ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Pruitt.
Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, it's good.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Administrator Pruitt, and thank you, Rob. Wow, dream. How many of you dream that this country will be better off than it was given to you? Show of hands. That's what it's all about. Billie Jean, that was a fantastic introduction. Thank you. Thank you for that. Terry is very proud looking down on us. Thank you for everything you do for not only Heritage, but the country. You are clearly a dreamer as well, in the real sense of the word. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session will be here in this room, and it begins in about 15 minutes or so, and it stars some of our economic real all-stars, including Steve Moore, who's here in the room with us now, and the panel is entitled Maganomics, MAGA, Making America Great Again, Nomics. So a lot more to be unveiled on that. That's here in this room. Feel free to get some coffee and come on back. And then we'll have some reminders later, but just so you know, I know everybody's gearing up for the president. He will be arriving around 7 o'clock. We will begin the program very promptly at 7:30. All guests will be able to go into the magnetometers and down back at this level at 5 o'clock. Bring your IDs with you. There will be no voter suppression, but do bring your IDs with you. We were happy to point you to Hans von Spakovsky, who covers voter IDs, but bring your IDs with you and limit the things that you bring with you to dinner. It's going to be a fantastic night. Are you excited? All right, great. Next panel back here in a couple of minutes with Steve Moore and an all-star crew of economists. Thanks.